This video was brought to you by Brilliant. The UK has one of the worst housing crises in the developed world, with a lack of social housing, soaring property prices, and sky-high rents. So last year at the Labour Party conference, Labour leader Keir Starmer pledged to back the builders, not the blockers. In other words, to reform and streamline the UK's planning system. And this week, the new Labour government has laid out a blueprint for building 370,000 new homes annually. So in this video, we'll take a look at the UK's housing crisis, Labour's plan to deliver millions more homes, and whether it can actually work. Before we start, if you haven't already, please consider subscribing and ringing the bell to stay in the loop and be notified when we release new videos. But first, let's summarise the situation. The UK, and specifically England, has a severe housing crisis. As we've explained in numerous previous videos, historically the ratio between the median house price and the median income has sat at around 4, which means that the median house used to cost about 4 times the median annual salary. Today, however, the average house costs 9 times the average salary in the UK and over 12 times the average salary in London. While there's some debate over what's causing the crisis, most people agree that the root cause of these high and rising prices is a chronic housing shortage. A 2017 government white paper outlined that the UK needs 225,000 to 275,000 new houses annually to be built. But since the 1970s, we've only averaged about 160,000. In fact, the UK hasn't managed to build over 250,000 new homes in any year since 1977. A pretty shocking statistic. The UK also has by far the worst homelessness crisis in the OECD. This isn't necessarily due to rough sleeping, but rather because of the shocking rate of people living in temporary accommodation because housing just isn't affordable. Between 2010 and 2023, the number of English households living in temporary accommodation more than doubled, and there's currently 1.3 million households on the council housing waitlist. And this is largely due to a steady decline in social housing. Since 1979, due to cuts, local planning restrictions, and Margaret Thatcher's right to buy scheme, which allow council tenants to buy their properties at a discount, the UK's social housing sector has shrunk by 26%, while other types of rent, such as through the private market or shared ownership, have only increased, reducing the overall share of new affordable housing coming from social providers. So here's where Labour come in. On Tuesday, Labour's Housing Secretary Angela Rayner laid out new compulsory housing targets for councils, with an annual national target of 370,000 homes, which would imply a rate of house building that's not been seen since the 1960s. The government has also changed the algorithm used to calculate housing need, which will increase some regions' targets by as much as 99%. Somewhat controversially though, this new method reduces targets in urban areas like London and Birmingham, where house prices are generally the highest. So some of these targets look exceedingly ambitious, so to help councils achieve them, Labour have updated the UK's National Planning Policy Framework to reduce limitations on construction and expand the type of land where homes can be built. The actual draft document is a whopping 84 pages long, so we won't go through the whole thing, although we have linked it in the description below. But let's pick out some of the key points. The easiest way to do this is by looking at the 3 types of land: brownfield land, grey belt land, and green belt land. Labour's first priority is brownfield land. These are previously developed sites that are now abandoned, often in town and city centres where housing is most needed. Labour's planning reforms effectively rubber stamp all planning permission on brownfield land, allowing houses to be built at greater densities in urban centres. A 2022 report from the Countryside charity estimated that the current capacity for brownfield land stands at 1.2 million new homes, with the highest capacities in the Birmingham and Manchester city councils, plus 3 London boroughs. Harnessing all of this brownfield potential would take Labour within a few 100,000 homes of their 1.5 million target, without even having to encroach on green spaces. So it makes sense that Labour have made this their top priority. The second is the so-called grey belt land. This is poor quality land on the edge of existing settlements or roads, like old petrol stations or car parks, that's also technically within the greenbelt. Labour are now requiring councils to identify their grey belt land, so that, where it's needed to meet targets, house builders can put forward proposals on grey belt land too. Now, this is slightly more controversial, as it technically allows for construction on the edge of greenbelt sites, but Labour have introduced a set of golden rules for grey and greenbelt projects, which specify that development should be 50% affordable homes, increase access to green spaces, and ensure that necessary infrastructure is in place, such as schools and GP surgeries. Thirdly and finally is the greenbelt itself. This is Labour's last resort. And as we've mentioned, any land released in the Greenbelt will be subject to these new golden rules, while any land safeguarded for environmental reasons will continue to be protected. On top of all of this, Labour are also planning on introducing further reforms to streamline the planning application process in the Planning and Infrastructure Bill. And they also want to make it easier to build key infrastructure and reverse the decline of the number of social rent homes by reviewing and reforming the right to buy discounts in the coming autumn. So now we've looked at their proposed reforms, can Labour actually achieve their housing aims? Well, there are sort of two questions here. Are the reforms politically viable? And if they are, will they actually work? On the first question, previous governments, including most notably the Johnson government, have struggled to get similar reforms through because councils and constituents don't often like building new houses in their local area, even if they agree that there's a housing crisis at the national level. This sort of politics is known as not in my backyard or NIMBYism, and it's proven especially effective in the UK because MPs are generally pretty afraid of upsetting their constituents. But even if Labour can find a way to get councils to build, for instance by refusing funding to those that don't make their targets, will this actually ameliorate the UK's housing crisis? Well, the answer is probably yes, but not immediately. The failure of decades of demand-side policies, like Help to Buy, does suggest that building more homes is the only way out of the housing crisis. But because the UK's housing shortage is so acute, this will take time to feed through to prices, and previous experience suggests that a 1% increase in the housing stock, i.e. about 250,000 new homes, would bring down prices by less than 2%. Nonetheless, if Labour can persist with these targets, by the end of Parliament they could have made a meaningful impact on the housing crisis, especially if any reduction in prices was paired with a non-trivial increase in real wages. Now, be sure to keep an eye on this story as it evolves, as much like every area of our lives, it's sure to progress quickly. In fact, if you're feeling left behind by the news cycle and fast developments in things like AI and tech, then you'll want to check out Brilliant. Brilliant is where you learn by doing, with thousands of interactive lessons in maths, data analysis, programming, and AI. Learning a little every day is one of the most important things you can do, both for personal and professional growth. And Brilliant helps you build real knowledge in minutes a day, with fun lessons that you can do whenever you have time. It's the opposite of mindlessly scrolling and truly helps you learn quickly. One course I found particularly interesting was their course on large language models. We hear a lot about AI and LLMs in the news, but Brilliant helped me to actually get hands-on with real language models, as well as exploring how they build vocabulary, choose their next word, and more. They also helped me grasp the importance of training data by comparing models trained on Taylor Swift lyrics to models trained on a cookbook or big text terms and conditions. If you want to learn more and understand the world around you better, whether that's in order to get a job in AI or just to understand what everyone's talking about, then you can try everything that Brilliant has to offer for free for a full 30 days by visiting brilliant.org/TLDR or by clicking the link in the description. Plus, by doing so, you'll also get 20% off an annual premium subscription. Thanks for watching, and thanks to Brilliant for sponsoring this video.